Hey everyone, welcome to Writer's Realm Podcast, and thank you for joining us as we journey through writing together. We're your hosts, Bob Adado,
Holly Robilliard.
And Austin Matthews.
and today we're going to talk about starting your writing year off right. That didn't make any sense, but we're going to go with that. Starting your writing year off right. Oh, it's the right. That's what's missing, yeah. Anyways, don't pay attention to my goofy way I talk. We're gonna help. We're all learning here, and let's learn together. So 2024 is coming up. But what are we working on now? Holly, what are you working on?
I am still working on Heartbound. I kind of disappointed myself a little bit that I didn't get it finished before Christmas. But I decided not to rush it. And I knew that the quality of what I could write was going to suffer if I really picked up and pushed myself to get it finished. And I was going to leave out a lot of the things that I wanted to have in the storyline. And so I backed off a little bit, gave myself a breather. And then I got to a point where I was about halfway through and had changed my plot so much from my outline that the other half of my outline didn't really make sense. So I went back and I had to kind of refigure out some of the kinks for the second half of the story. So I've done that now and I'm pushing through again. So I think I've got the last quarter to go. And then I'll be moving on to editing finally. So I'm pretty excited
Yay!
about that.
That's really exciting.
Yeah.
All right, Austin, what are you working on?
I think the main thing I'm working on right now is the Arcanist Cookbook, which is what I'm submitting to our writers group. So just trying to go through and I'm adding a couple of chapters here and there. So right now I'm having to focus on like a horror scene, which is interesting because it's all submitted through letters is kind of how each chapter is broken down. So trying to get a letter that really dives into horror is kind of a weird thing, but it's like necessary for the story. So yeah, just working on that, trying to get that knocked out, hopefully by summer of next year as the whole story. So we'll see.
Okay, yeah. And then me, I picked back. I'm going back through my book four, Coil and Fang Hunter's Moon, which involves werewolves, a glowing green gem, and let's see, Annie Oakley is in there because it's going to be kind of a weird west, kind of a weird western kind of a thing going on. So these are my. I definitely need to talk to you guys about how I can weed out all this craziness, but like it's too late now. Like every book has like three crazy things going on at the same time, and I think I'm learning my lessons. But we're gonna get into this with starting a year off right and things we've learned, things we should change. But yeah, I mean, if I can, I'm just gonna go off of the back of what I just talked about, which was I am adding way too many like subplots. You know, I have like an overarching theme and throughout all six of these books, which is to find and capture Jack the Ripper. But within each of these books, my heroes, Coil and Fang, have to go through all these other bad guys to get there. You know what I'm saying? So it's not just hey, let's just fly off to the Death Star and blow it up. It's like you know what I mean. Like if you watch Star Wars: A New Hope, it's like there's all kinds of stuff that happens in between in between that. So I think that's sometimes it's messing me up, and then sometimes I love it though because I think with my ADD brain, I like all these different things going on at the same time. But I think for if we're starting the year off right for me, I'm gonna really try to focus on like one main objective without
Mm-hmm.
getting too crazy into the weeds. Because for me, like I said, my ADD, I'm gonna jump into whatever direction as soon as I see the squirrel, as it were, and just
Mm-hmm.
start running after it. And it gets me in trouble a lot because I have to
Yeah.
dial everything back through editing and go, okay, man, this was
Mm-hmm.
I should not have gone this far. Um, it's just ridiculous, but it's just a huge time waster. But if we learn from these mistakes, which
Yeah.
we're all going to be talking about, it helps us, right? It helps us kind of focus and stay focused and achieving our goal a lot more quickly.
Yeah. I kind of fall into the same thing a lot of times. Like I want to have everything explored, which has been one really nice thing about working on the Arcanist cookbook. I need to make sure I'm not saying the Anarchist cookbook, because that's a completely different thing. But working on the Arcanist cookbook, using footnotes through the letters, it's like, oh, I've got this tangent that I really want to spend only several chapters on, but it's like, oh, I can just put a footnote and it's fine. And it's 3-4 lines, and I feel satisfied that I explored it. The reader gets this little bit of world building, but then we don't have to spend, 20 pages, 30 pages on it. And so I feel like that's been something that's been really satisfying working in this weird kind of a medium.
Yeah, I get that was one of the things that I talked about. I think I don't know if we talked about it in our writing group or if we talked about it on one of our podcast episodes, but as a new writer, I had this really big fear that I wasn't putting enough in my books for it to be interesting. So when I was writing out my plot and et cetera, like I didn't feel like there was enough there that it was going to be interesting for someone to read. So then I kept coming up with new plot lines to go, like little like character arcs and little things that could go in that would kind of subplots that would take the story in a different direction. Which was great for a little bit, but then once you get halfway through, and like you said, Bobby, suddenly you have all of these other storylines, and now it's like, I'm trying to wrap things up in the end, and it's like, well, this I haven't even talked about, and I haven't talked about this, and well, now this part doesn't make sense that I have outlined because of how I changed it there for somebody else's storyline, and it kind of like completely throws me off. So that's definitely a huge problem for me right now. And it's going to take me longer in editing, I'm sure, because now I'm going to have to go through and I mean, it's fine to go through and cut things out, but at the same time, I think that my writing process would have gone a little bit more smoothly if I had just not done that.
Yeah. And part of that too, I think, is like, I have this fear of like, or conception, I guess, is a better word, that everything has to happen on the page or it didn't happen. And it's like the reader's smart enough to put 2 and 2 together. They don't need to see everything. They don't need to even be told it happened. Like if your character was doing this and then there's this end product, they understand stuff happened in between. And so just, giving your reader credit to be able to put those pieces together.
Yeah.
It's actually really funny you mentioned that. That was something I talked about in the blog post that I'll be posting this week on our website, is that people, like when they don't explain everything on the page, they forget that when a character is not on the page, the character is still living their life as time is passing. And so your character is not like stagnant for that time period. So it's like you kind of force yourself to be in a position where it's like, okay, do I like explain everything that's happened in the last 2 weeks and now it's just like an info dump because time has passed? Or, like do I pretend like nothing has happened? Or, it's like it's hard to find that balance.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite scenes I've written, probably ever, is like in a sequel to a book. The 2 brothers like meet up for the first time, and one of them is like one of the main characters of the second story. And so like you get caught up with him and everything that's going on, and he like sees his brother for the first time in 15 years and acts like, oh, you're still, my little brother. And his little brother pins him against the wall and starts beating the hell out of him. And he's like, you abandoned me. And like basically goes off on him, and he's just like, oh yeah, like 15 years have passed. I can't, like, the reader can't act like nothing happened. The characters can't act like nothing happened. There's consequences for this big gap.
Yeah.
Yeah. And talking about staying focused and whatnot and getting the story done. And, one of the things I learned is to not rush the deadline, like or I shouldn't say deadline. Honestly, it's probably more like don't rush the story. Like Holly, you're talking about, I thought I was going to get it done. And we have that, like all of us have, we're not like, it sounds bad, but we're not professional writers, we're still baby writers, all of us, and we want to grow in a good, healthy way, and we still have life going on, and we have people, and what I mean. So just stuff happens. But I remember one of the hardest lessons I've learned, and it was very expensive for me, was when I was writing my second book. It's called Pray for the Hunt. I found out that a convention was available, like a convention table was available, and I was at a certain date, and I said, okay, I want to sell book 2 at that convention. I want to have book 2 ready. So what did that mean? So I kind of had to work backwards a little bit. Like, okay, so I already know it takes, when you order your books through Amazon or in some, what's it called? Ingram Sparks, Ingram Spark, you'll need probably like 6 weeks, like 4 to 6 weeks to get your book, even through Amazon. Okay, so then if that's the case, then how long is my editor going to take? Okay, she needs like maybe 3 or 4 weeks, So then by that time, I was like, okay, so I need to have this book done in like 3 weeks. And that was really stupid of me. I got it done. Okay, I got it done. Prayer for the Hunt was a nano project, so I got it done, most of it, but you still have to, I added another 30,000 words to it with editing, you take stuff out. But I got it done. But I rushed it like way too. I still to this day I like parts of it, but I don't like the whole book. I'm sorry. I probably shouldn't say that about my own work, but like I wish I could have spent way more time with it because I just pushed it for something really stupid, which is to just have it available in print. Like it'll be in print like a year from now. You know what I mean? Like, why did I do that to myself? Why did I kick myself and just put all that pressure on me? And because my editor took a little bit longer to get it done, which is fine, perfectly fine. I'm not rushing her at all, but hey, she's got a life too. Then I had to like do a next day order on these books. And I've done this twice because I'm an idiot. I did it with my third book too, because I was done with a book, but like, hey, I need my books. And like, I don't remember what it was, but I had to order, anyway, I had to do like a next day order for these books through Amazon, and it was so flipping expensive. It was because it's already going to cost you like, here's a little tidbit of info. It's probably going to cost you around $4.50 to print it out, each book. But if you want next day shipping, that's like another $300 on top of all your books that you ordered. And so that's what I did for this book too, and it ended up being like a huge headache. And so I'm going to go to conventions next year, or I should say, for 2024, but I'm definitely not going to, I'm not going to rush, like say book 4, because now that's what I'm working on. I'm like, okay, let's hurry, get this done. Like, no. It'll be done when it's done. And I'm not going to worry about that anymore.
Yeah. Well, 2 things. One, I'm jealous that yours cost like $4 to print because I write epic fantasies. So like mine are like $7 to print the paperbacks. And I looked at printing hardbacks, but I'm like, I'd have to sell them for like $30 a pop to break even.
Yep.
So as much as I would love that, it's not necessarily practical. And the other thing is like you're talking about not kicking yourself to like get things done, but also don't kick yourself for past mistakes. Learn from them.
Yeah.
And move on.
Right.
So that you don't do it for book 3 after you did it for book 2.
Right. Yeah. And now I know, like now I already could see which conventions I'm going to go to, and started applying for tables and stuff. But like, that was a very, very expensive lesson that I had to learn. Conventions are fun though. We'll have to talk about a convention episode sometime.
I'll have to go to a convention at some point.
Yes.
Yeah, I know we talked about doing like a live episode or something at a convention. That's also, that would be really fun as well.
We want to do that. So if you have any ideas, let us know in the comments. But yeah, that would be fantastic. Go to like a fantasy convention and talk to other authors there, because there always is. I've been to the San Diego Comic-Con. I've been to steampunk conventions. Any kind of where we're at are the realm of science fiction, speculative fiction. There's always authors there. So it'd be a blast. Yeah. If we can.
Well, that's the thing is like, it doesn't matter how good of a writer you are. It doesn't matter where you are at in your writing process. It doesn't matter how many books you put out there. You can always learn something, and you can always give knowledge to somebody else.
Yep.
And that's why I feel like that's the best part about conferences, is that you go and you learn things, and you can maybe see something in a different light that you never would have thought of. And
get new ideas. Yeah. Make contacts, Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not very good at the whole networking thing.
Not yet.
Well, I mean, even for like my day job, I'm just like, okay, I should probably go to this Christmas party so that I can, be sociable.
Right. That's funny.
Mm. Yeah, so I understand. It's so let me backtrack here to what you were saying about rushing it. I actually saw an author was saying the other day that she has just finished another book in like 5 or 6 weeks or something like that, which to me I think is amazing. And she said like it sounds absolutely crazy, but the nice thing that she finds with that, which I do agree with this, is that as you're writing in that short period of time, everything is still so fresh in your brain that you're not kind of going down the rabbit hole and you're not kind of overthinking your plot and things like that because it feels like it's flowing smoothly.
Mhm.
So I do get that. Obviously, it's not something I've figured out how to do yet. But I think it's really good because it can really help you keep like the same pacing, like the correct pacing in your novel.
Mhm.
Which I think that's a huge thing. I think for people when they're first learning to write, or even some established writers, is like getting that pacing correct throughout the whole novel is really hard.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll say like part of my I guess my writing routine has been like, okay, I'll spend, a couple of weeks planning things, like really getting things organized, and then I'll write about 15,000 words a week. Once I think I've got a good idea, and just knock out a rough draft, within like 4 or 5 weeks. Just because like, yeah, it is a lot easier to keep it consistent. I don't have to like go back to my notes as much and be like, what was I writing in the last chapter? Because I just wrote it either yesterday or today. And so it's a lot easier to pick it up and keep steamrolling through the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I have a tangent question that has nothing to do with any of this.
Well, is that really a
It's
tangent
writing.
then?
It's writing. No, it's writing. But how do you guys get your stories? We all they're are they just born there or what? Because I saw a picture of it's a character, Poison Ivy from the Batman franchise. Except it was a totally different picture of her. She's usually, she's supposed to be seductive and, voluptuous and whatnot. And but this one was like more terrifying. It was more like, oh, this like a witch. You know what I mean? Like you
Mhm,
find in the woods, kind of like very very frightening, dark circles under her eyes. So but I
mhm.
was like, oh my gosh, I want to write a story about this. But like,
Yeah.
is it visual for you guys, or do you hear about it in a song, the lyrics, or where do you get this?
I mean, for me, it's like it's anywhere and everywhere. So like one of my magic systems is a group of people that whenever they like have an injury, if they bury that part of themselves, they'll like heal. And so like if they're completely like decapitated, as long as you bury the whole body, boom, back to life the next day.
Oh,
And that came from reading Red Rising, which if you've read Red Rising, you're
I
like,
have it. It's back here
it's
somewhere.
it's a sci-fi,
Yeah.
has nothing to do with magic at all. Um, and so at one point they're like, oh no, you can't get buried. Like your people aren't allowed to get buried. And I was like, if the main character gets killed and then comes back to life, how awesome would that be? And then like, no, they just fake his death. And I was like, spoilers for Red Rising. But
Oh, thanks.
it happens in like the first 5 chapters, and we're on
God.
book like 7. So I don't
All
it's
right.
fine. If
Okay.
you were gonna read it, you'd have read it.
All right.
But yeah, so I was like, I was disappointed in that moment that there wasn't something more to it. That was like just that. So I'm like, so many of my ideas come from like, oh, isn't it gonna be cool when this cool thing happens and then it doesn't happen? I'm like, well then I'm gonna make it happen. Which is like
Mm.
exactly how like Tolkien got the whole thing with the treants. Because at one point in a Shakespeare play, they're like, oh, we're gonna have to take the woods of such and such to this place.
Mm.
And they like take a couple of sticks. And he's like, that's not how this works. And so he made the ints to literally
Mm.
move the woods. And it's
Wow.
just, I
That's
think that's
neat.
so cool. Is like, I have this frustration, so I'm going to make it true.
Okay. Okay. I like it.
Yeah, I think a lot of it for me, it's so weird. I think I struggle sometimes with my science brain because I'm so used to like paying attention to I'm so used to paying attention to certain things and I have a really hard time looking outside of the box, which is terrible for a writer to say. So with that being said, I really struggle sometimes to find like just the right idea for me and I overthink it.
Mhm.
But when I see something, like for example, Heartbound, I got the idea, as I said, for Heartbound, I was watching a TV show and there was something I saw and I was like, oh, and I just got this one image of, this thing that I wanted to have happen. And I won't say what it is because it's a spoiler, even though I think I actually said it in one of our past episodes. But anyways, just in case I didn't, I saw this thing happen, and that, like, as soon as I had that one idea, I was like off and running. From there, it was like my mind was going a mile a minute. Everything was just working out and making sense, and I was able to, think about different like sub stories and things like that. But I really struggle sometimes just to find that like initial idea. But
I will say, like, having a scientific brain, like, I initially was a physics major in college, but switched because I was like, that's what am I going to do? Be a physicist? No. And so, like, I love reading scientific articles, those kind of things, just to kind of like get these weird ideas, because I love writing fantasy. But there's these things like, we as a scientific people still don't have a full understanding of the universe. So the idea that people that are like into the arcane and all this occult stuff, like that they would understand the physical consequences of their magic is just like hilarious to me, to be like, oh, I'm going to punish them because they don't understand physics. So one of my worlds, they can stretch and shrink space, like dimensions. And so they end up using warp things to like move objects faster than the speed of light. Well, they don't understand that like there's a certain buildup of high energy particles at the front of a warp bubble, and they end up blowing up their own planet. And like that's like the start of their story is, oops, we used magic, didn't understand physics, and we blew up our planet.
Nice.
And so like I definitely think that's a fun place to go, is that scientific side of things with epic fantasy.
Well, that's your brain, yeah. And then Holly, I wouldn't say, yeah. I mean, you can use your analytical brain, logic brain to create stories and stuff. But maybe this is maybe this wasn't a tangent. Maybe the starting your year off right with trying to, because sometimes writers, we do have issues. I'm gonna say not me, not right now. I have too many ideas now, but just trying to create, to come up with something. Like, what I see a lot too is, because like I said, I'm in Reddit all the time. What I see a lot in Reddit sometimes is, does this makes sense, or do you think people will read this story, here's the breakdown of what it is, and like I don't get that, I don't understand that, because I feel like you have to like it. I'm not writing for anybody else, I think we talked about that. I'm writing these Coil and Fang books because these are the books I want to read, so I'm writing them for me, and then here you go, you want to read it, okay, there, but like if you're having an issue trying to figure out the right idea, like, well, is this an idea, or is that an idea, or maybe we can unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, I think part of it too is, it's like, once you have an idea or two, it takes a lot longer to write that book than it did to come up with that idea. So in the time period that you're writing that idea, you have another idea and you're like, man, I really want to work on that, and you start piling up
That's
idea
Holly.
after idea.
That's Holly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's like, you start to get this like to be written list that just is going to hit a point where, like Sanderson has talked about it on his podcast, where it's like there's come a realization that he's not going to have enough time to write all the things that he wants to write, so he has to choose which things go on the chopping room floor or the cutting room floor, like forever. Like there are stories he's not going to get to write, and he has to make that decision. And so it's like, I think at the beginning of your writing career, you have this idea of like, man, I don't know what I'm going to write, but then at the end of it, you're like, I don't know what I'm going to write. And it's just these very different mindsets of, how do I fill the time?
Yeah, that's really true. And something that I had mentioned, I think when we were talking about our Preptober stuff, advice that I was given was that you should just get away from like your computer, from your notepad, or from anything, from all your stuff, and just get outside and just take a walk, or just pay attention to what's happening around you. And I always thought that I was like that kind of person that did, like, I go out and I walk my dogs, and I, walk through the neighborhood and stuff like that. And I always thought that I paid attention to my surroundings. I do not, because when I went out there with like the active mindset of like, I'm going to pay attention to my surroundings, I saw the craziest stuff happening. Like, it was like, there was like in the first couple of days, there's like 3 different events that were just like insane. And I'm like, is this happening all the time?
Like in the news, or what are you talking
never
about?
notice it. No, like, so The first one was I was driving to work. So driving to work and I look over and there is this man standing in the parking lot. It's like 7:30 in the morning. And he's got his arms out and this guy is completely covered in birds. And like,
Not
Wow.
where I thought this was going.
That's a Disney.
what is going
Yeah.
on?
That's a
What is
Disney
going
princess.
Just crazy.
Home Alone 2 right there.
So strange. I'm like, this is wild. So later on, I think it was either that day or the next day, I'm standing in my house and I hear like yelling or some sort of like commotion outside. And I peek out, look out the window, and I see this big black dog go flying by, followed by like this long leash. And then a woman wearing a maid's costume is running behind this dog. And I'm like, this
Wearing a
this-
maid's costume? Like that was she
this-
wasn't the maid. She was had like it was
this-
like Halloween costume.
it was like an actual like, I mean, I don't know what kinds of maids wear these costumes.
I mean, like old school, like
Old
Right.
school,
French
like
maid
with a
kind of
what? Yeah,
costume.
like a little white
Mhm.
apron and everything.
Oh my
And
god.
then it was just
Where do
wild.
you
And then
live?
I was driving another day and I like look over and there's like these, I see like a couple people rolling around on the ground and then one of them stands up and takes off running and he's just got this like big like mannequin under his arm as he's running.
This is
street.
awesome.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
this stuff is happening and we
Yeah.
just don't pay enough attention to
Right.
see.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like,
This is crazy.
I mean, where I live, like, I remember there was one time I was going down the street and it's like, I see somebody riding a horse going one way. And I'm like, okay, that's normal, whatever. And then passing right by him was somebody on a unicycle. I'm like, this is not normal.
This
So
is
it's just
not-
like, the thing is like, neither one of those things is particularly abnormal, but like, as you go through your daily life, like, we just accept these weird random things as like normal.
Hmm.
And like, I think that's something that's really useful for writing too, is like, sometimes I can get in my own head about like, oh, how are readers going to like adjust to this? Like, are they going to be able to suspend their disbelief? I'm like, we suspend our disbelief every single day about,
yeah.
you know, the people around us. Like, I
Right.
walked around on my college campus once and like somebody just walked up to me and was like, hey, you want to buy a sword? Totally normal to me. And I was like, no, thanks, man. Didn't even bat an eye. Like, it was totally normal.
Wow.
Gosh.
That is amazing.
Yeah. Now, with that being said, I will say that if you have these great ideas and they don't make sense in your story, don't add them.
I will say, keep a notebook or like a Google Doc of
Okay.
these ideas, because
Yes.
you know what? Eventually, you'll have a story where they do make sense.
You might go back
Absolutely.
to it. Yeah, you
Mhm.
might circle back to it and go, oh yeah, this is
Yeah.
where that's gonna fit.
Yeah, you might want to be a little bit more organized than I am, because I literally just have a Google Doc called Ideas, and I'm pretty sure it's like 150 pages, which means it's not very helpful at the moment.
Yeah. You know who else, real quick, was oh gosh, he's like a top 5 best-selling author. I can't remember his name. But it was the same thing. He had a stack of yellow notepads and he's like, these are all my ideas. And like he's he's got like a huge mansion and was it Dean Koontz or
Oh, Dean Koontz.
it was, I don't remember if it was Dean Koontz or another guy, but anyway, yeah, a huge stack. He's like, yep, these, because somebody asked, oh, do you ever want to take someone else's idea? It was just kind of it was kind of a weird question to ask him. And he's like, no, I look at this stack of my own ideas, like I can't get rid of them, they're all over
Yeah.
the place.
That's the thing, is like, there's just not time enough
No.
to do it. You know, it's
No.
like, yeah, maybe I might reach that one day, but I can't imagine, like, I think I have like 72 books outlined. Like,
Hmm.
I don't have time to take ideas from anybody else,
And
other
let
than
me,
to say that I don't like your idea, I'm going to do it differently.
and let me just share, I'm retired now. I've been retired for 3 years. And no, you still don't have enough time, because there's all of a sudden you're retired and everyone's like, oh, good, you're retired. Now you can do this. Like, okay,
Just tell them you're not retired. You're a professional author now.
I'm a professional writer. That's what and a podcaster. What?
Boom, look at that. You
Yeah.
have 2
I
jobs.
am-
You're not retired.
Oh my gosh, Austin, thank you.
Game changer.
I'll just get myself
That's what I'm here
fired from
for.
all these other things. Yeah. No, I can't help you, Grandma. I'm too busy being an author. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really funny. As like a new writer, it's so weird how many people, once they find out that you're a writer, they are like so willing that they're like, oh, I had this dream and that would make a good story. And like my dad even this weekend was like, oh, I had this idea a long time ago to write a book, and I always wanted to do that, but I never
Mm.
did. So here, you should write about it.
Mm.
Like,
Yeah,
Thank
I've
you.
I
had
think it's
several
really
people ask to
cool.
ghostwrite for them. I'm like,
No,
I mean, if you're
thanks.
paying me, sure, like gladly, but
I can't. I couldn't ghostwrite. I need to do my own stuff. Like you said, like
Yeah.
my, talking about age or whatever. I know I'm older than you guys. I'm closer to the grave, and like, it's dark humor, but like, yeah, we're on a time clock. I mean, we actually don't know when, But no, I need to get my books finished because I do have a stack of unwritten books, left to go. So
yeah. I will say that I did used to ghostwrite, and it's actually kind of fun. But like, it obviously sucks at the same time because you're kind of at the whim of some other person, or worse yet, a company, to actually come up with the ideas and see them through. So it's one of those things. It's a good living if you can get steady work at it. So like I had steady work with a website doing it, but yeah, it's an interesting gig.
All right, starting a year off right. What else we got?
Yeah. So coming back around to this, one of my biggest pet peeves is when someone describes something that their character can't actually be seeing. And I catch this a lot, and I'm like, if it's like, especially when it comes like first person like point of view, if you're like everything's happening inside your character's head.
You're
So
talking about
one of my biggest pet peeves is when people are describing things that there's no way their character could possibly see. So especially when it comes to like first person or something like that, like you're limited to what your character is thinking if that's like the point of view that you're working from. And then they'll be like, and then sneaking up behind them in the from the dark alley, and I'm like, how do they know that someone, like,
right.
it's just like things like that just drive me crazy, and that's probably not the best example. But if you're going to do it, it has to be like the character is, can hear footsteps behind them. It has to be something from their point of view. It can't be like the guy was like creeping in the shadows and then scares them or something. Like,
Right.
it doesn't make sense. And I catch it all the time, and I'm like, how does your character know that this is happening? There's no way.
So everyone does it. It's a common mistake, you think?
I see a lot. I see a lot,
Yeah.
especially in new writing, when you're first kind of trying to figure out like what your point of view is and how you're writing. I think it can be tough. It's something that I definitely struggled with when I first started writing. I had someone go through and like redline like a whole bunch of sections in my first work because they were like they wouldn't know this. They wouldn't know these things. There's no way they would see this. Like, or like, describing someone's eye color when there's not another person there, like, or a character's not thinking about that, right? Like, just little things like that.
Like I've never seen that, but I was just thinking like one person alone in like the kitchen, and her clear blue eyes moved around, looking at the cabin. That would be kind of weird. That's awkward.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense.
No.
Yeah. I agree, but I also fall on the opposite end of the spectrum where I'm like, I might not describe a main character clearly for the entire book, and like I get notes on my first draft where they're like, hey, what color hair did the main character have? I'm like, I guess I never said, did I? Maybe should have come up in the 400 pages.
Oh, wow. Oh, so you just leave it out completely.
I mean, it's not something I think about. Like, if it's not relevant to the story, my brain just goes, nope, not important. We're not thinking about it. Okay. And like, I described them as like noble born, and like described what noble born people looked like. And my brain went, good enough. Blonde hair, stubby noses, all you need. So everybody is generic, because that's the kind of story I'm writing for them, is the nobles get slaughtered.
Wow.
Because they're all generic and interchangeable.
That took a dark turn.
Well, that's
Austin. Yeah, that's awesome.
It always does with Austin. Here we go.
Everyone gets slaughtered. All right,
the only people that get happy endings are the villains.
Wow.
I mean, such is life, right?
but POV is definitely something I had to watch a lot of YouTube on, because I didn't know omniscient POV. There's third person. There's what else is there?
Limited.
Limited. Yeah. I mean, there's
Mhm.
this. There's I don't know what any of this. What do you mean? Even while I was like halfway through my own book, I was like, wait a second, because somebody was asking. One of my beta readers was asking when I sent them the first few chapters, like, whose POV is this? And I was like, I don't know. Let me check. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's something too that like writing with multiple POVs in particular gets really muddy, because it's like I had, my first book had 8 main characters, and so I was like, at first it's like, oh, I don't want to like just stick a label on it and be like, hey, it's this person's POV, and so it was like really confusing. It's like, you know what? If it helps the reader, I'm fine with it. Like, it's not a big deal
Mhm.
to just like stick their name at the very beginning of it,
Mhm.
or to be like use their name in the first sentence, so
Yeah.
the reader's like instantly, oh, this is the person I'm following now. Okay, cool.
That's pretty
And
much
just
what I'm doing right now.
Mhm.
Yeah, in my books. Yeah, that's exactly. I didn't do that in the first book, but now it's exactly what I. Yeah, just Fang turned around, blah blah blah, or Detective Coyle picked this up, or yeah, so we know where we're at. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like it doesn't have to be much, but like really you should be using the characters' names fairly regularly. Like once you over rely on pronouns, it can muddy the everything,
Right.
really. So
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, one of my other pet peeves is, it's not really a pet peeve actually. I should say it's just more of like a, this is more of like a do this instead of a don't this.
Okay.
But do remember to use all of the senses.
Ah.
I feel like so many people just rely, and like we naturally like want to describe things as we see them.
mhm.
And so we're like, it looks like this, or it looks like that, or she sees this. And that's really good. Like a lot of your story is going to be that, because we are visual people, but you also like smell is a huge one. And I recently learned this, probably this is something I should have known for a long time, but the part of your brain that's responsible for processing like your memory and your emotions, also processes smell,
Hmm.
which is why people have such like when you a great example is when you smell like chocolate chip cookies, you think of grandma's house, because your brain ties those memories together. And so we are missing out as writers on the opportunities to invoke a lot of emotion in our readers
Mhm.
by describing like certain smells.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So
And
I
I think
think that
that
that's something to remember.
Okay.
Yeah, and it also misses out on a lot of characterization too, because like the way that your character perceives things, like if you have a chef as a main character, the way that they describe things, like even if they're not technically the narrator, it's like coloring the narration with that kind of stuff, where it's like a lot more smells and presentations and flavors. So like I have a whole magic that's based off of like culinary arts, and like one of my favorite lines that one of them like throws out there is like, he's arguing with somebody. He's like, man, of all the flavors in the world, why'd you have to be bitter? And it's just like this idea of like it infuses every bit about him, and even the way that he like looks at people's attitudes and like their way of life. And so I think that's just such a beautiful thing to be able to bring into every bit of your world, is like, yeah, we're not just visual people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's other senses, and but why we're doing this is because we want to put the reader in our story, right? We want them there right next to the character, and that's something I still have to go back, and when I edit, I still have to get rid of she saw the waves crashing on the shore kind of a thing, because that takes us out. It's more like you're reading about this person, whereas the waves crashed up on the shore and reached for her bare toes, in the wet sand. Now I know what that feels like, because I mean, I know what the beach feels like, but like I'm there in the story, and when we need our readers to be there as well. But yeah, so we got sight, we got smell, we got taste, we got touch, we got hearing. It doesn't have to be all of that, right? But
Please don't have it be all of that all the time.
No.
And like I also get that there's actually like 20 something senses, but we don't need all of them all the time.
No.
Please don't be getting into like the proprioception, like, oh, they felt a little dizzy because they couldn't feel exactly where their body parts. Like, okay, like we get it. You're getting into all of it, but
Yeah.
Yeah, just like sprinkle it in there, a dash of this, a
Yeah.
little bam, as
Yeah.
Emerald would say. So
I will say too, try to remember to be creative. Be
Uh-huh.
creative with how you're describing things. I like to read a lot of like romantasy, but I swear if I hear the line like his calloused hands scraped against her skin one more time, if I read that one more time, I'm gonna lose my mind. Because it's like, yes, I get it. I understand what that feels like. Everyone has calluses, everybody
Yeah.
knows what that feels like. But
Mhm.
also, like, everyone says this now.
yeah, and like
Like
it's one of those things, like we talk about tropes as like these big things, but like we have like little linguistic tropes that we use all the time
Mhm.
too. So like that, or like a blood curdling scream. Like, yes, like we all have this shorthand of what that means, but like it also loses some of its meaning because of that. So it's like,
Mm.
what can you say that says the same thing in a fresh way to where I feel my blood curdling? Like
Mm.
when you think about what the words blood curdling means, it's sickening, really.
Okay.
Like if you think about curdling milk in your veins
Ew,
as
gross.
blood,
What in the world?
right? It's horrifying.
It's
So like
Yeah.
really evoke those things in a
Mhm.
fresh way.
Yeah. So, I mean, where are they going to do that with the thesaurus, or use your imagination? I think Holly
You
just
could
said use
all,
your imagination.
if
Though.
you use the thesaurus, you might end up like Joey in the one episode where he gets the V encyclopedia. And like that's the danger too, is like you don't have to like have a giant vocabulary to have a
Yeah.
fresh perspective on things. In
Right.
fact, I would say like conversations where I've had like a non-native speaker try and explain things to me, there's
Mhm.
this visceral, real gut stuff that comes out.
Mm.
Like I remember somebody was telling me a story about how like they fell and they like scraped their leg up,
Mhm.
and they were like, yeah, the raw meat was just exposed. And I was like, that's just such an intense way to put it. And it's like, I got that. And like, yeah, that
Right.
wasn't necessarily the reaction they were going for, but like, it was just such a, and like, those aren't big vocabulary words,
Mhm.
but it just takes it one thing
You
and moves
don't.
it into a realm it's not normally.
Yeah, and you don't need the big. Yeah, please don't. Yeah, don't go for the big words that you never use in your own vocabulary. That's it. Then it becomes very obvious, you know. But yeah, like I remember I wrote a scene for this woman that was found that was left by Jack the Ripper, and I wrote that her chest was opened up. Oh gosh, I just had it in my head, now I forgot it. I can't remember the stuff I write. It went something like her chest was opened up like a wounded eye, and my editor was like, I don't like this at all, but I get the picture, and that's why I don't like it. But just think of a different way to like just sit there and think, right? Yeah, that's all it takes. Just some
Yeah.
patience.
Or even like, feel it, right? Sit there for a minute, like feel your calluses. What do they feel like? Like, what does it feel like on your skin? Like, put
Right.
yourself through that motion, right? If you want someone
Mhm.
else to believe it, then you have to believe it. Like, you have to kind of understand how that feels to describe it, right?
Yeah.
To put yourself, like I always say, like I love when I talk about food in my books. If I'm talking about a pastry or something in my book, I was probably eating that exact same pastry as I was writing that scene, or was like very
Perfect.
recently,
Yeah.
because I really understand how it tastes and like,
Right.
what it smells like and what it feels like in my mouth and,
Right.
things like that.
Yeah.
Right.
I will say though, like, so we're talking a lot about like getting really into the descriptions and the sensory details, but try and save that for like I like to save it for high intensity scenes or a lot of action, because the thing is that the more details you give to something, the slower and more stretched out it feels. And so it can add tension to action scenes.
Okay.
But if you have a slow scene and then you're going into a lot of details,
Mhm.
I'm just going to be right to sleep.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Dickens. I can
I
always get to
absolutely
sleep.
agree.
Yep.
And don't use it as a filler either. Like that's important, is don't use description as like a filler scene, basically.
Just don't do filler. I mean, that's fine too.
Yeah.
Just filler. Describe
flat
filler
across the board.
I'm a new writer. Describe filler.
Okay, so if you're watching a show and it's like a murder mystery and then they go to the beach for no reason, that's filler.
Oh my gosh.
Doesn't advance the plot, doesn't do anything if you can cut it and it doesn't affect the story at all, it's filler.
Ooh, I like that. We might have to do a self-editing podcast soon. That if you can cut something out, a whole paragraph, and what does your story look like? You know, and if it's fine, then you're good to go.
Yeah, that's like the like I mentioned recently, I had a character that I wrote into like the first few chapters and then completely forgot about. And I was like, oh, I can't get rid of him though, because he's like, pivotal to the scene. And I'm like, he's not though. He's not that pivotal to the whole story, because obviously I forgot about him for 25 chapters. So at that point, you can cut that out, right? Because his part in the story, like it in a way is a filler, because someone else could easily do what he did, that is someone else that's more important to the story. Just requires a little bit more thought behind it.
Right.
Yeah. And you can like flesh out your filler, because it's like you may have like your main character be part of a squad in like a military squad or whatever. Like, yeah, you can't be like, oh, these other people are filler, I'm gonna cut them out. Like, they still have to, somebody has to be there. So if you can cut those people out and it not make a difference to the story, then you need to build on your filler, and you actually need to make it not filler. So there's those two ways to solve that problem: is either cut it out or make it not filler.
And then there's sometimes I've read books where it just seems like, you know what, honestly, they're not books. I'm beta reading for people, and it's just like I want to say like 90% of what I'm reading is film. Like, what are we doing here? Like, what is going on? What am I looking for? Because like, it's just, he went to the beach and then he went into the store to get some cigarettes, and then he walked down the sidewalk and he thought about his dad, and then
it's feeling like you're describing the room right now.
Yeah, and you're just like, what? Where am I? What are we doing? Anyway.
Yeah. So I'll say, for me, like, I'm not a planner, so like I will end up with a lot of scenes that like probably could be cut. And so whenever I'm going through to do my first like heavy edit, that's when I outline and I look at a chapter, I give a summary, and then like a 1 sentence like synopsis of the significance of that chapter. And then I look at story structures for each one of my characters. I'm like, okay, is this serving a role in anybody's story structure, their story arc?
Right.
If it's not serving anybody, then it needs to be cut. Like, yeah, it might be 3,000 words, but you know what? It didn't do anybody any good, and it's just going to bore the reader. So, gone.
And speaking of, I don't know where this is going to fit, starting your year off right by when you're creating your story, because I've seen this in 2 beta reads, and newer writers, obviously, that they completed their whole goal. Like, they, in the first few sentences, maybe a few paragraphs, they said, you know, I need to find the magic amulet. Okay, without the magic amulet, we're all going to die. Okay. And so I keep reading the chapter, and guess what happens? At the end of the chapter, they find the magic amulet. And okay, good, we got it. And like, and that was it. That was the end of the chapter. And I'm like, well, what happened? Are we done? Is this the story? So, I mean, I told them, like,
now,
I feel
called out, because this is definitely what happened with my first chapter whenever I submitted to the writer.
Okay. But like, just give me a reason. Give me a reason to turn the page.
Exactly.
You know, like, that's great. Great, you found it. But hey, we found the magic amulet, and then a bad guy shows up. You know, or it's, you know, attached to a skeleton hand or something. I don't know. But you know what I'm saying? Like, when you're
because like that's the thing, is like
planning out your book, just kind of spread it out a little bit more.
Yeah, because like I thought I was doing a good thing, because it's like, oh, they like discovered this thing they needed to discover. They've been working hard for it, and then chapter 2 is where I introduced the problem. But it's like, okay, well, just combine chapter 1 and chapter 2. There was literally no reason for me to separate the solution from, oh, it wasn't really the solution all along. Right. And so like that helped me hugely to be like, hey, like, be like, oh, we're so close to getting the thing that we want, and then it gets ripped right from our hands.
Yeah. So, all right.
And also on that note, I will say, like, don't shy away from beta reading. There's nothing that will help you. Like, number one, writing is going to help you learn to write more. But like, reading other people's work, especially rough drafts and those kind of things, is going to help you so much. Like, I think my time as an English teacher helped me so much, because like I was reading, you know, 100 people's works every single day, and I assigned them 3 pages of writing every single day. So I was reading a book a day essentially. And like, you get really good at picking up on like mistakes, and you're like, okay, I see these things in my own writing,
Mhm.
but it's so much clearer when I see it in theirs that I'm like, oh, I need to go and change it in mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And it could even be like, you could even do it with a friend with a published book. My best friend and I, um, we read like the same books all the time, and then we'll go for brunch and we'll talk about what we liked and didn't like about the book. And it's always been an eye opener for me. And it's actually one of the things that inspired me to start writing, is because I was like, why are they saying these things? Like, these things don't make sense. If I know that they don't make sense, then I could definitely write something that I think is better, right?
Mhm.
And so you can go through and just critiquing another book with someone and like bouncing like those thoughts back and forth off each other. It's really going to open up your mind to other ideas that you could have for your own stories.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
I mean, we're
that's how
gonna.
we started a book club.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to. I'm getting all kinds of ideas for future podcasts, but definitely betas. But as far as your listener, viewer here on YouTube or podcasts, please let us know what episodes you like to see more of, or topics. But yeah, I've got beta reads. I've got all kinds of stuff. I already forgot the others, but there's some. But,
Don't worry, we have them all written down.
Well, all
so.
written down. So, but now comes the part of our show where we talk about our don'ts. But I feel like
After an episode of don'ts.
But I know after an episode of don't do this. I mean, we're trying not to do that, but we kind of did. But we still have some more don'ts in us, I'll bet. And my first one would be, don't beat yourself up. You're a new writer, or maybe you've written a couple of books already, or you want to write better. Don't beat yourself up thinking I'm not successful, or I'm never going to do this, or even worse, comparing yourself to somebody else. Do not do that. Learn. If it's something like I just talked about POV. I don't know what they were talking about. What do you mean POV? Yeah, my editor was like, "What, you need some more deep POV." I'm like, "Okay, I have to go look for that. I have no idea what she's talking about." But learn, go find out. There's YouTube, there's other podcasts, there's other authors that have been on this trail longer than we have. There's nothing wrong with just sitting down and taking some notes and learning and applying it of what you learned. All right, but don't beat yourself up because you're getting something wrong, or you feel like you're not getting it fast enough or something. It's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
We're all on this journey together, and we're all going to be helping each other out.
Yeah. And kind of piggybacking off of that, like I would say, like, don't have a short-term perspective of like your writing journey. Like, one, like obviously don't compare yourself to others, but like do compare yourself to your past self. Like if you have writing from 5-10 years ago, go and look at it. And I can almost guarantee you that you're going to think it's terrible. And that's because you've grown since then. And then guess what? Everything that's not terrible, you wrote, which is awesome. So
Yeah.
like me and my brother send quotes to each other all the time, just from random things in our day or whatever. And I sent him a quote the other day and it felt so good because he went, "Oh, what's that from?" And I was like, "Me. I wrote that."
That's fun. That's awesome.
Yeah, I like what you're saying too about not judging yourself and not comparing yourself, to other published authors. I had mentioned a while ago that I've set aside my first draft for my novel, so that way when I'm completely done the first chapter, or when I'm done the first chapter, when I'm completely done the book and it's published, then I can look back and I can do a side-by-side comparison that I'm going to put online, so that people can see like it went from this to this, because it's so important. Like that was really hard for me too in the beginning, was like, oh, I'm never gonna, I would spend all day writing and then I would go read a book like, oh, I'm nowhere near as good as this. And it's like so disheartening. So
I mean, the truth is you're not. I mean, the cold hard truth is, yeah, we're not they. I'm not, like right now I'm still reading Joe Abercrombie. He's fantastic. I'm like, oh my God. Every few paragraphs I roll my eyes like I'll never come up with that sentence. But like, who cares? We don't need another Joe Abercrombie or whoever Hollywood's reading, right? Like we're our own writers, people are, they want to discover us. We don't need another, Agatha Christie or whoever else it is. So yeah. Great point.
Yeah. So with that being said, I will say my don't for this week is don't be afraid to make these mistakes that we just told you not to do. Because that
We
it's
just
okay
told them
make
not to
them.
do it.
Try to avoid it if you can, but don't be afraid if you do make them, because again, it's all part of the learning process. A lot of these mistakes you're going to be catching anyways as you're going forward and you're editing and you're growing as a writer. So don't be afraid to do them, because you're going to catch them later, and don't get disheartened, if you send it out for a beta read and someone's like, hey, like this doesn't make sense. These are the things that we need to hear so that we can grow and we can get better. So
Right on. How fun. Wow, that was a great episode. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
So don't forget to write and subscribe to our channels at the links below so you don't miss any of the Writer's Realm content. We always love to hear from our listeners. So if you have a question or a topic you want us to dive into, please get in touch. Until then, we will say adieu. Bye.
I do. To you and you and you.
bye.